Yahuwah designed our bodies perfectly to get periods when our bodies are ready to birth. While it's not fair for a young girl to have to birth a baby, her body can do it. If you want help from your husbands, be ready for them to help in their way and not yours. No one wants to see their child in pain. It is hard, but necessary. It is good for you. It is good for them. It is ultimate protection. No unicorns, mermaids, dragons, monsters, dream catchers, evil eyes, stones, Santas, evil-looking superheroes, and astronauts. Everything is make-believe, from mermaids, dinosaurs, astronauts, and unicorns. They are all fairy tales. These are just a few highlights of what we are going to experience as we go ahead and review Karissa Collins' second book, which is titled Raising Arrows for Christ. Now, if you're not aware of who she is, Karissa Collins is a fundy influencer, friend of basketball player Shaquille O'Neal, and currently pregnant with her 11th child, despite multiple warnings from multiple doctors about the effects these pregnancies are having on her health, and how if she continues to keep getting pregnant and having more babies, it is likely to kill her. I have made 2 previous videos on Karissa Collins. The biggest and most comprehensive one is the saga of Karissa Collins, in which I document basically all the content she's put on the internet, from her starting blogging about 16 years ago to her now pretty massive Instagram account. It talks about her animal abuse and neglect, her medical neglect of her children, her harmful beliefs around vaccines, contraception, homeschooling, and so much more. I would recommend that video if you want to find out a little bit more about her. And she's also written another book about why she's never going to stop having kids, and neither should you. That was her first book. I reviewed that one as well in another video. The links to them are available down in the video description and as a pinned comment on this video, so you can check them out if you want. But today we're going to be talking about her second attempt at writing a book. This is called Raising Arrows for Christ. All the controversial topics we don't want to talk about while biblically parenting. Now don't worry, I didn't pay for this book. I managed to get access to it for free with a free trial of Kindle Unlimited, which is nice. Thanks, Amazon. Chances are Karissa might get a couple of pence from me reading this, but it's really not going to be a lot, thankfully. First up, I will say this. The formatting of this book, like her first book, is absolutely terrible. Different sections have fonts of different sizes. Everything's all over the place. There's a lot of things just like centrally aligned for no reason. Look at this contents page. It's a mess. There are fewer spelling errors in this book, which is fantastic. And she actually manages to use some, but not all, full sentences. So she is catching up to, like, say, my 11-year-old nephew in terms of her writing ability, so that's commendable. But there are other passages that are just impossible to read because it's so poorly written. She throws full stops in there when she needs a comma. There's just random sentences that are just like these partial, incomplete clauses, and I'm like, that's not a sentence. It's not a full sentence. Like, nothing makes sense. Let's start by reading the introduction together. Hi! I'm Karissa, a wife of 17 years and mama to 10 children with baby number 11 due in August 2024. I'm writing this book to share some of the wisdom Yahuwah, God's Hebrew name. Some say Yahweh, but after research, I found the original Hebrew translates to Yahuwah, has so graciously given me over the years. There are many ways to run a home, many different seasons, callings, giftings, and resources for each family. But ultimately, there's one great guidebook, the Bible, along with the Holy Spirit that we can go to raise sharpened arrows that hit their targets assigned by Yahuwah. Yahuwah. That's really hard for me to say for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe it's just the dirty atheist in me struggling. I'll be sharing our testimonies, tips, and tricks that have worked for us and what Why do I speak for a living when I literally can't talk? This is like me criticizing Karissa Collins for writing a book and not being able to write. I speak, and yet I can't speak. Oh, I'm terrible. Basically, what he's revealed to me on these taboo, controversial topics we're too scared to talk about in the body of Christ. My disclaimer will always be, don't take my word for it. Just as they searched the scriptures in Acts to make sure what they heard lined up with the words of Yah, I encourage you to also seek the scriptures for yourself. Not just a few verses here and there, but the entire Bible, in order to seek the heart of God on each topic. I always say if you haven't read the whole Bible, don't solidify your stance. That's the key difference between religion and relationship. Doing something because it's someone else's truth versus doing it because you've read it, sought it, experienced it, and are convinced it's true. Now, on the one hand, I kind of want to commend her for this whole, like, yeah, do the research yourself. I've done the research. This is what I found out approach. That's commendable. That's great. Love it. However, I do think it's interesting how, honestly, most of the people who have read the whole Bible are usually the ones who have the most problems with it and take issue with certain parts. A great example being Bart Ehrman. Now, Bart is someone whose work I've talked about on my channel basically since I first started making videos. And if you're unaware of his work, Bart studied at a Bible college because, and this is a quote from him, "My academic drive was fueled not by intellectual curiosity so much as a religious desire for certainty." In his book Jesus Interrupted, which was my introduction to his work, God knows how many years ago now, Bart writes, "I became passionate, fierce even, in my quest for knowledge about the Bible. At Moody," the Bible college he attended, "not only did I take every Bible and theology course I could, but on my own I also memorized entire books of the Bible by rote. I studied during every free moment, I read books and mastered lecture notes." Eventually he went on to study at Princeton Theological Seminary, where he says he turned up there young and poor but passionate and armed to take on all those liberals with their watered down view of the Bible. "As a good evangelical Christian, I was ready to fend off any attacks on my biblical faith. I could answer any apparent contradiction and resolve any potential discrepancy in the Word of God, whether in the Old or New Testament. I knew I had a lot to learn, but I was not about to learn that my sacred text had any mistakes in it. Some things don't go as planned. What I actually did learn at Princeton led me to change my mind about the Bible. I didn't change my mind willingly. I went down kicking and screaming. I prayed lots about it, wrestled strenuously with it. I resisted it with all my might. My choice was either to hold on to views that I come to realize were in error, or to follow where I believed the truth was leading me. In the end, it was no choice. If something was true, it was true. If not, not." He says in another book of his, God's Problem, How the Bible Fails to Answer Our Most Important Question, Why We Suffer, "I had solid Christian credentials and knew about the Christian faith from the inside out in the years before I lost my faith. My strong commitment to the Bible began to wane the more I studied it. I began to realize that rather than being an inerrant revelation from God, inspired in its very words," the view I had at Moody Bible Institute, "the Bible was a very human book, with all the marks of having come from human hands. Discrepancies, contradictions, errors, and different perspectives of different authors living at different times in different countries and writing for different reasons to different audiences with different needs. But the problems of the Bible are not what led me to leave the faith. These problems simply showed me that my evangelical beliefs about the Bible could not hold up, in my opinion, to critical scrutiny." Now, I've only read 2 of Bart's books, but he has written a fair amount, and they are absolutely fascinating. He is far better at going into the actual scriptural stuff and talking about that than I am and ever will be. He will pick apart translations. He will look at why things were interpreted the way they were, or translated the way they were, or even written the way they were in the first place. He looks at how certain books became canon while others were essentially thrown out, what political and social forces influenced how the Bible came to be the collection of books that it is today. It's fascinating stuff, and I thoroughly recommend, if you're interested in that, definitely going and checking out his work. I just kind of wanted to bring this up to kind of show his point of view and show that, well, I don't know, maybe Karissa might be wrong. I kind of would like to know if she has ever really actually read and studied the whole Bible critically, like with a truly open mind, like with, going into it with the idea that this might not actually be fact, there might be problems. Because if she goes into it with that and it really is true, then that's what she's going to come out thinking, that it's true. But I kind of feel like someone like Karissa is scared to be wrong. Another thing I'd actually love to see is just Karissa sitting down and having a conversation with someone like Bart Ehrman, and not a debate, because Carissa's not a debater, which is absolutely fine. I'm not a debater. I don't have that specific skill set required for debating, But I would just like to see her just sit down and talk with someone, just face to face, have a chat, have him challenge her, question her, support her. I think that would be fascinating. I really do. Karissa goes on to say that her book is for the people that don't just want to obey Yah in the salvation issues, a term we created, but in every way. It is for those that are seeking truth and want to live righteous, that's another word that's hard for me to say for some reason, and blameless lives. Through Yahusha is Jesus' Hebrew name, we can be set free from sin. Not that anyone is perfect or has arrived, but we have the Spirit that raised Christ from the dead, and his death had a purpose, to set us free from sin. You see what I mean about her not doing complete sentences? Anyway. Basically, her first point in this book is all about why we shouldn't use the word God at all. God is wrong. God is incorrect. We should always be saying Yah, Yahuwah, Yahusha for Jesus, is blah, 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 God, Jesus. They're just English translations. There are no J's in the Hebrew language, so Jesus can't even be a correct translation. I know. She says, to take something in vain means to come to no end, to have no success or result, irreverent or blasphemous, having no real value or worthless. When we don't call him his actual name or call him a title like God, we're not assigning him value. Many are called gods. Yahuwah has given us his name many times in the Bible. He wants us to know his name. He is a personal God, Elohim. He longs for relationship. The names of Yahuwah were taken out of our Bibles and replaced with other names and titles. I have a Bible that restores the names of Yahuwah. We know his name and call upon him. All of this to say, in this book, I will refer to God mostly as Yahuwah and Jesus as Yahusha. I do tend to slip up and call him God still, but I've tried to call him Yahuwah for this reason above. You know, this change is really going to ruin the whole flow of a hit pop song. Why don't we trust God? He knows best.
Why don't we trust
Yahuwah?
He knows best. Why don't we trust
Yahuwah?
He knows best. Why don't we trust
Yahuwah?
He knows best. Why don't we trust
Yahuwah?
He knows best.
And I find it interesting that she makes such a big deal out of this in her book. And I'm like, you know what, if you want to do this, fine. I have no problems with it. Call him what you want. It doesn't bother me. But she makes this big deal of doing it at the start of this book. And then she tries to continue doing it throughout the book. But she doesn't do it in her day-to-day life. So it all just feels very performative. Look at any of her Instagram posts and she's still saying God online with no disclaimers. Nothing about, oh, you should really say Yahuwah. So again, I can't help but feel like this chapter is weirdly performative of like, look, I know proper words, you can trust me. But if she really believes that calling God God is taking the Lord's name in vain and it's a sin, then she is sinning a lot. I mean, just look at her latest Instagram posts. Masculine men love God. There's so much freedom in simply trusting God. No one will ever convince me that trusting God to plan your family is unwise, dangerous, only for some, unfair to the children, financially responsible, physically harming, and so on. God is faithful. He never makes mistakes. Hashtag God can be trusted. Hashtag trust God to write your story. Blah, blah, blah. Like, if this is sinning, she's sinning multiple times a day. She goes on to say that, I remember several years ago being taught in church that Yahuwah, well, can I just say God because it's easier for me? Like, it's really hard to get my tongue around Yahuwah. It doesn't come, I'm just going to say God. Sorry, I'll take this sin. It's fine, I'll do it. I can remember several years ago being taught in church that God will get his way no matter what, that whatever happens, happens for a reason and is the will of God. So therefore, that child that got murdered, that is Yah's will. That girl that got raped, that was Yah's will. The mother that aborted her baby, that was Yah's will. This is not the Bible I read. So at this point I was like, oh, thank God, like she's pushing back against this idea that bad things are God's will, bad things happen for a reason. Well, because, you know, who would want to worship a God who acts through making someone be raped? You know, that's absolutely horrific. And I was like, oh, thank God she's finally seeing some sense here, right? No. Karissa always has to go on to disappoint us. As I read the Bible year after year, I'm seeing such a different narrative. God's people, the Israelites, constantly being delivered by him, and then they take their eye off of him, fall away, follow other gods and the desires of their hearts. This is so horrible to read. Terribly written. God gives them over to their own desires, and then they discover their own desires equal death and cry out to him yet again to deliver them. He hears their cries with compassion and sets them on the right path again for it to happen all over again. And she goes on to basically say, when something bad happens, it's not because it's God's will, it's because the people who the bad things happen to weren't worshipping God enough. They weren't being religious enough. They weren't worshipping in the right way. Like, if something bad happens to a person like being raped, it's their own fault, essentially. It's victim-blaming, harmful nonsense. She then goes on to complain about prayer, kind of, but says it's still necessary, but it's also not... She says, yes, prayer is selfish in a way. It is about us. It is crying out to an all-powerful God to work on our behalf. It is saying that we need Him to do what only He can do. It is humbling ourselves under His control and giving up our resources and ways to follow His, knowing that they are best and He knows best. It is also selfless. Jesus cried out to God in His time of need, asking Him to take this cup from Him. He wanted to escape the plans He had come to fulfill, but prayed God would have His way. He gave up His will for God's. He asked for Himself, but ultimately surrendered to His Father's decision. Oh, God. It's terrible to read, isn't it? I take back what I said about her writing improving, because it's terrible. Learn how to use a comma, Karissa, please. Like, I wouldn't be so judgmental of her writing ability and lack of forming a coherent sentence if, one, she wasn't selling this book, and two, she didn't use this book and all her other platforms to constantly brag about what a good job she does homeschooling all 10 of her kids. If this is her ability to write and she's trying to teach other people, then I feel sorry for those kids because they are not going to have a decent quality education from her. Homeschooling can be a good thing, it can be fine, some people are great at it. In this case, with Karissa leading it, and knowing the curriculum she used, which we reviewed in another video, no, her poor kids are screwed. Right, this next passage, I've reread this several times now, and call me crazy, maybe I've just gone word blind, but I don't think this makes sense. This is not how you use the word prosper, right? Yes, there can be selfish prayers that remove Him from the equation. Absolutely. Prayers for mansions, riches, and fame. Prayers to elevate us and eliminate Him. But asking for health and provision is what He longs to give us. He longs to prosper His children. He longs to be our good Father that provides, rescues, loves, comforts, protects, guides, and answers us. He longs to prosper His children just doesn't make sense, does it? That's not how you use the word. Prosper can be a verb, but it's not that kind of verb. You can't prosper someone in the way that you, cuddle someone. You can say He longs to cuddle His children. He longs to pet the dog. But you can't long to prosper someone. You can maybe long for your children to prosper. You can help your children prosper. But you can't prosper a child. Sorry, it's a petty thing, but it really, really bothers me. And again, no complete sentences. Prayers to elevate us and eliminate Him is not a complete sentence. You are listing things here, Karissa. Just write a list. Use commas. Throw in some semicolons if you need. I was also very confused about the sentence. Prayers to elevate us and eliminate Him. Does she actually mean eliminate here? Because I wouldn't think she would want to eliminate God. Confused me a lot. Anyway, after all of these jumbled thoughts about prayer being selfish, but like a necessary selfish, it's selfless, but also not selfless, and God doesn't need us to pray, but we're told to pray. It's terrible, it makes no sense, it's a bunch of nonsense. And then she finally says, ever feel that block? You are struggling. You are in your flesh. You are angry. You are depressed. You feel helpless and hopeless. You get sucked into victim mentality and selfishness. And you either don't remember to pray or you don't want to. That is a block. Our flesh is screaming in pain, and it often feels better in the moment to sit in self-infliction and pain, to vent and complain about our situation or circumstances. Too many times I know I need to pray, but it seems to be a fight and struggle just to get my body in a humble prayer stance. These are times we need God most. These are times prayer will change you. Humbling ourselves and giving Him our challenges and emotions will change things. They will immediately change us. 1, stop using incomplete sentences. This is a nightmare to read. And 2, it's great that this is an outlet for Karissa, that she feels prayer helps her, but surely she has to realize that that's not what everyone needs, right? That's not good for everyone. Anyway. She says, I highly suggest praying out loud. The enemy can't hear our thoughts, so our out loud cries to God are our weapons against the enemy. Sorry, but who is this enemy and why are they listening to my conversations? Bit weird. No, I'm joking. She then has a chapter on our children's salvation, in which she said this is the most important chapter of the book. The sole reason we raise children in Christ. their salvation. Our greatest desire for children. We can do everything else right, but if we get this wrong, we have failed them completely. This is what you want to put your time and energy into. I barely even know what she's trying to say here, because again, she's not writing incomplete sentences. This is nonsense. These are just words on a page. Okay, no, actually, we can kind of figure it out from context clues, but Karissa needs an editor desperately. Basically, what she's trying to say is, the most important thing we can do when raising children is to focus on their salvation. Why can't she just say that? Why does it have to be all this nonsense? I get that not everyone is a good written communicator, and there's no shame in that. We all have different skills. But when you're trying to sell a book, you kind of need those basic writing skills. You need to understand the fundamentals of how to write. Karissa doesn't have those skills, and it's really, really frustrating. Like, I kind of wish she would either take a basic writing class on how to form a full sentence, if she wants to write, or she could just try a different medium, like painting, maybe. Maybe she could try and paint her message. She then says that if you, as a Christian, want your children saved, it doesn't actually matter if they're good people or not. So that's nice. The word of God is clear. It says to teach your children the ways, commands, and words of God, to remind them daily, to speak to them day and night, to hang them in your home, to command them to your children, to live them out, to take them seriously. Our children truly do imitate our every move. Oh, God help those kids. They follow in our footsteps. If we follow Christ, they will follow us. If they see Mum on her phone all day, they will want a phone and to be on their phone all day. If they see Mum in the Word of God and cherishing it and valuing it, they will long for it. If they see Mum worshipping and praying God, they will imitate it. The irony of this, when Karissa is literally one of those people who is constantly on her phone all day and makes her children film multiple videos with her on her phone multiple times a day for Instagram and Facebook and social media, and it's not even entertaining irony, it's just frustrating irony. She then goes on a long rant about how she doesn't believe people are saved by works, but by faith, which in my experience of watching these people and making these videos and seeing all this kind of stuff is honestly one of the most dangerous mindsets to have. Because there are a lot of people who live like this, who don't really care how they treat people, because they think they can get away with anything as long as they really believe in good, they'll be alright. And that's so harmful, because they're the people who hurt other people and still think they're doing a good thing. And they also harm people by judging good people, doing good things, just because they have a different or lack of religion to them. And I just find that whole mindset kind of horrifying. There are still little snippets here and there, though, of things Karissa says that I actually like. For example, we should be encouraging kids to read the word for themselves, not just telling them that it's true and you have to believe it. Amazing, I love that. Although, I'd add that it's good to get your kids to read and learn about all different types of religions and different perspectives and cultures and stuff, not just yours. But on the whole, not bad. Until she ruins it with, these are our daily conversations about life and obedience to God. We talk about the why and where the world gets their ideas and practices. That line about obedience, that's the bit that bothers me. She wants them to read stuff for themselves, but only the things she tells them to, and as long as they come to the same conclusions as her and remain obedient throughout it. She then goes on a long rant about how we need to start scaring our kids into following the Bible, because the Bible is scary, and that's okay. The message we are giving in churches isn't evoking the fear of God, repentance, and a desire to turn from sin. We're treating the word of God like a used car that needs to be prettied up in order to be valuable. Stop worrying that you might make God look bad, offend someone, or scare someone away from God. Instead, speak repentance, hope, mercy, grace, righteousness, and judgment. It is all required. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. Don't shy away from it. Come on, everyone. All good parents scare their kids into submission. Why not join in? I hate this. Chapter 4. I say chapter. These are like 2 to 4 pages long each. It's thankfully a short book-ish. Still longer than it needs to be, though. Chapter 4 is family planning / unplanning. My favourite topic ever. God has so graciously given me much wisdom in this area. I'm forever grateful, and so are my 11 children. Oh really, Karissa? I didn't know you were interested in this. I couldn't tell from your literally thousands of Instagram posts. A lot of the stuff in this chapter isn't new, so I'm not going to go over it all again. A lot of it's just repetition of the stuff we've spoken about in other videos, like, the saga of Karissa Collins, my review of her first book, which is pretty much entirely focused on this topic. I will read you a few select passages, though, in summary, because, why not? I graduated college and wanted to be either a professional WNBA player or a professional singer. I never loved children much or had a desire to be a mum. In fact, mum life was very unappealing to me. I know it's mean, but I'm still doubting that professional singer bit. She told us at one point she was offered a recording contract and she was going to be like the next big thing, and then she puts out music like this.
You need to make up your mind. So indecisive sometimes, being tossed to and fro. You ain't got no self-control. Like a tidal wave, you've been moving all around. Like a silly woman searching but can never be found.
I got married at 23, I was on birth control when we got engaged, so that it would kick in by the time we got married. And I saved myself for marriage and we agreed to a 5-year plan before having children. So actually this bit is new, that she started on birth control when they were engaged, so it would kick in by the time we got married. I was like, what birth control could Karissa possibly have been on where she needed months for it to kick in? Bizarre. Now, I know from having read all of Karissa's blogs from the time that she was on the combination pill. So that's the birth control she's talking about. And generally with the combination pill, you are either protected from the first day you start taking it, if you take it on the first day of your period. Otherwise, it's after 7 days from when you start taking it. So she didn't need to be on it for months while she was engaged for it to kick in. She could have just started a week before the wedding. Anyway. Even if she was talking about some other option, one that she hasn't told us she was taking, other kinds of contraception are a bit different. So some IUDs start working straight away, others it takes 7 or so days. There can be some side effects with things like the coil though. So, and I've been quite open about my own personal experience with birth control and all the issues I've had with it. So I currently have the Marina coil. And if you don't want to hear about this, that's fine. You just skip ahead in the video a few minutes. If you don't want to hear period stuff, that's fine. But I mostly got that to help with the really, really bad periods I've been having all my life and how debilitating they've been. And getting the coil was an experience. So I finally got it inserted, I think at this point about 4.5 months ago. And there was a whole lot of drama trying to get it inserted and all these problems. I had to be referred to specialists and it was tried a whole bunch of different times because apparently I have an abnormally small cervix and uterus, which made the actual insertion really, really difficult. And my regular doctor couldn't do it, so they had to refer me to someone else and so on. Anyway, finally got it done. And the insertion itself wasn't too bad. Bit of a stabbing pain when it went in and then that subsided. And then I had really bad cramps for the rest of the day after the anaesthetic and painkillers and all the stuff because they used a bunch of stuff on me. They gave me like a spray thing, a gel, they gave me painkillers to take by mouth as well, and like there's a whole bunch of stuff. Once that wore off, the cramping that day was bad. But after it kind of initially settled down, like a couple of days after it was in, I had constant bleeding and cramping every day for about 2.5 months. These weren't as bad as like my regular period cramps, for example, but they were a lot. It was a lesser amount of pain, but the constant level of it was just draining physically, and it was a bit of a nightmare. And the constant bleeding I was getting every day, again, it wasn't heavy like a regular period, but it was the fact that it was nearly constant every day that again was really, really draining and exhausting on my body. So after those first 2.5 months, I've now had about 6 weeks where the bleeding has nearly completely stopped, except for a few days around where I would normally be getting my period. I get a bit of bleeding there, but it's not like a full period. It's just kind of spotting, if that makes sense. And I do get some cramps on those days, and I get sporadic cramps here and there randomly. But again, it's more like I'll get like an hour of cramps randomly one day, or an hour of cramps randomly another day, or then around the time my period would be due, I'll get, 2 to 3 days of very mild cramps. It's nothing compared to what my periods used to be, and this is far more manageable and bearable. I was told when it was inserted that it might take around 6 months or a little longer for everything to kind of properly settle down, for it to start minimizing my periods, but that's already started happening, which is great. And it's a really good sign that I might be one of the people for whom it stops periods for completely, which would be wonderful. I would love that if that's the case. So while it was a difficult few months at first, it has really, really helped now. And I feel like in the long term, for the next however many years it's going to be in there, it's like, what, 9, 11 years this one lasts now? Pretty amazing. Long term, it's going to be fantastic. So I feel like if Karissa was getting something like the coil, maybe that's something she would have wanted to prep in advance, so she wasn't getting, cramps every day or bleeding on her wedding day, Absolutely understandable. But, maybe she would want to get that like 6 months early to give her body time to adjust. But we know from her blogs that she's never had a coil. She's never had an IUD. So it can't be that, okay? So I don't really understand what she was going for here. Just for like a little bit of information for you guys as well, in terms of other birth control, with things like the implant, that's usually effective after about 7 days. Same with the contraceptive patch. And if you get the contraceptive injection within 5 days of starting your period, you are protected from pregnancy immediately. Otherwise, that's a 7-day wait, and you need to keep getting it every 12 weeks. But there really isn't a method out there where you need to take it months in advance so that it will kick in by the time you're married. It just doesn't exist. It doesn't make any sense. Karissa talks a lot about birth control across all her social media and her books and her blogs, but about 80% of it is just complete misinformation. If you do want to take a deep dive down that rabbit hole and see me discuss the whole contraception thing in more detail in regards to Karissa's misinformation, then again, check out the saga of Karissa Collins. It's all in that video. Here's another bit of new information from Karissa. She says that one of the books that kind of changed her mind about using birth control and having a lot of kids was Be Fruitful and Multiply by Nancy Campbell. And she says, I'm not a reader. I hate reading, actually. And the day that book came in, I read it in 2 hours. I've never read an entire book in my life. That I can believe, that she's never read a book in her life. But also, I kind of have to ask, how? How is that possible? She says she went to college. How did she get through an entire degree, even just high school, without reading a book? I'm baffled. Baffled, I tell ya. Also, how long is this book she claims she read in 2 hours? Okay, we found it. Oh god, that's a hideous cover. Horrible page. 240 pages. See, I don't believe she read it in 2 hours. So, according to Google, that thoroughly infallible resource, the average reading speed for an adult is 1 page per minute. That's 60 pages per hour. So that would be a minimum of 4 hours to get through that book for the average person. But honestly, based on Karissa's writing style, I don't believe she would probably read at that speed. I think she would be slower. So I don't believe she could read this book in 2 hours. I think that's a lie. Maybe she did really enjoy it and she just, read it all in one sitting. I can believe that. And maybe it just felt like 2 hours because she was enjoying it so much. But as it stands, I do not believe she got through this in 2 hours. Absolutely not. There you go, that's a screenshot for you of that hideous cover. She then tells a story of one of her pregnancies nearly killing her and all the doctors telling her to stop having kids, but how she refused. Again, check out the Saga of Karissa Collins video for that, because it is a heartbreaking story. It's terrifying. It's irresponsible. I genuinely worry about her. And it really bothers me that this is something that she keeps spreading. This idea that it doesn't matter if you die and leave your kids motherless as long as you keep pushing out more babies. She talks about this in all her content. She goes on and on about how she would die for her kids, but not that she would die to ensure her kids' well-being, just that she would die to make sure more of them exist. She doesn't really care what happens to them once they're here, as long as they're born, Then at this point she retells the story of some of her kids nearly dying. Again, like it's something to brag about, which is horrifying. Again, we covered that in the other video, but if you'd like a brief summary, basically one of her kids in particular was hospitalized twice because they got sepsis from an untreated UTI that nearly killed them. So the first time this baby was unable to hold their head up, they couldn't breathe properly, they had no control of their limbs, they were an absolute mess. So Karissa decided, yes, we should all continue going to this basketball game as a family. And afterwards, yes, we should all go to dinner as a family. Baby's still ill. Yeah, it's fine. Do it after dinner. Finally, they decide to go to the hospital, and the child is rushed away from them and ends up in intensive care for several months and, was on death's door, basically. By the time they got to the hospital, their nappy was full of blood from, their nappy and urine was full of blood, and Karissa's like, no, we didn't see it before. It wasn't there before. And it's like, come on. If this UTI has got to the point of causing sepsis, it's been there for a long time. How did you not see it? How do you not notice blood in your child's urine? It makes no sense to me. And she says in response to all this, I fully believe God created women with a womb, and when we give him our life through faith, that includes our wombs. He is our family planner. We are free. That is good news. We are free to enjoy our spouses, to not count days, to not prevent, to not worry, to not try to conceive and to not try to conceive, to not overeducate ourselves with the stress of fertility, to know that every life is a gift from God. We don't do anything. We just trust God. And you can too. Horrible use of full stops. But seriously, the whole thing we're free to not overeducate ourselves. Karissa. I don't think anyone would say she was overeducated about anything. And I do think it's really irresponsible of her to tell people to not even do a basic bit of research about their own bodies. I think that's something everyone should know. And it's great that she finds freedom in all this, but this is absolutely not true for all people. I know that I don't find the idea of risking pregnancy freeing. I'm not trapped because I now thankfully have birth control, which means I don't need to worry about pregnancy. In fact, I find not having to worry about getting pregnant is what is freeing and what makes me happy. And I think a lot of people with uteruses will feel the exact same way as me. And some will feel the same way as Karissa. Both are okay. As always, I have to ask these people who go down this route of but God created your womb, so you have to be pregnant. To those people I have to ask, what do you say to people who are infertile, but who still want kids and would be amazing parents? Because that seems incredibly unfair to them to be well, God made you infertile, so you're just not allowed to parent. It seems very unfair. And on the other hand, shouldn't the same go for us child-free people? If you believe God made me the way I am, then God made me not wanting to have children. Surely I should respect that. And if you want to talk about all this stuff physically, then my body is not designed for having kids. Technically, I'm fertile in that I release eggs, and I don't think I have a hostile uterus lining, for want of a better, more accurate term. But I do have an abnormally small uterus and cervix. I have a weirdly positioned cervix. I have very, very small, narrow hips. And I have hip problems and mobility issues. All of that would make being pregnant and giving birth nearly impossible. Surely if I should be listening to my body, then my body is saying, don't have kids, right? I mean, this is just the way I was made. I've got to respect it, don't I? But in reality, it's ridiculous to expect our organs to dictate what we do with our lives, isn't it? I have this whole poem that's about kind of what it's like for women in society as we age and the expectations that people push on us. And one of the lines I have in that is that we women are defined by our strengths and our hearts, not arbitrary things like a womb or body parts. And that's something that I really, really stand by and really believe. It's kind of nice on the one hand to feel what, my body kind of backs up what I want and I feel like it's all working together. But not everyone has that. And we are so much more than what our body defines us as. Just because you might be infertile, that doesn't mean you should never be a parent if that's what you want. Just because you can have kids, that doesn't mean you have to have kids, and everything in between, Our identities, our life, our choices, our values, our strengths and our weaknesses are so much more than just what organs we have. Karissa goes on to say, if God offered you $1 million, would you take it? I've never met someone that said no. So why are we denying a child? Does your child have more value than $1 million? If someone kidnapped your child, would you pay $1 million to get them back? Of course! So why are we sacrificing our future children's lives for the mighty dollar? Me time, vacations, ministry, the world, education, careers, our sanity, patience, and so on. Speak for yourself, Karissa, but if I had $1 million, I would pay that not to have a kid. And no matter how much money a person offered me to get pregnant, I would not take that. I would not get pregnant for $1 million. I wouldn't get pregnant for 2, 5, 10. No. No. So this feels like a bizarre comparison to me. Just because you value your kids like that doesn't mean the rest of us feel the same way. And then she goes on a big rant about how she hates abortion and it's bad and blah, blah, blah. People shouldn't have control over their own bodies, all of that nonsense. She says the same heart of abortion is the same heart of prevention. You don't want the child, and you are willing to put chemicals in your body, cut off body parts, stress about the what if, count days, and time it perfectly to prevent it. I mean, for people like me, yeah, absolutely. I am willing to do all that to prevent a kid. Fine with that, absolutely fine. And I don't want a child, absolutely don't. And I thoroughly support abortion and the right to have an abortion if that's what people want, so yeah. But not everyone feels the same as me. Here she goes on to say, having a large family might look scary, but I promise it isn't. It is one child at a time, and honestly so much easier than these 2-child households. But sometimes God only gives 1 or 2 or 3 or even no children. So a big thing that Karissa likes to go on about in this book and her others and her other content is this idea that having more children is better because the older children can help look after the younger ones. So actually, the more children you have, the more help you have, and the better it is. No, stop it. Parentification like this is a huge problem. Getting your older kids to look after the younger ones and take on these big responsibilities before they are emotionally or physically ready is a huge problem. I've spoken about this in other videos, so you might want to check out my video on the IBLP and the Duggars. I talk about this in some detail in that. But there's other resources out there that you can find. So like one example is there's this book from way back in the 90s now, so it's quite an old book, but it's called Burden Children, Theory, Research and Treatment of Parentification by Nancy Chase, and it's a pretty dry book. It's very academic and it's not the most fun to read, but I read through a few chapters for this video, and there's one bit in it where Nancy writes, parentified children in effect are parents to their parents, or I'd add here other younger children too, and fulfill this role at the expense of their own developmentally appropriate needs and pursuits. She also writes about a number of studies carried out in the 90s, so again this is a little older, but there have been more recent studies that back this up too. She says that various studies found parentified childhood roles especially problematic to young women, and in fact called parentification particularly devastating for women's development. She says there's also been links found with parentified children growing up to show poor academic performance, low levels of satisfaction in both friendships and intimate adult relationships, low self-esteem, and codependent patterns of relating in which the individual overfunctions to maintain the approval or connection with others, even at the expense of personal well-being, and so many more issues. Having more kids might be easier for Karissa because the older ones are now looking after the younger ones, but chances are this is going to have severe, negative, long-term consequences for her older children and their development. We've seen it amongst the Duggars and other big families like that. This isn't anything new, it's just people like Karissa seem to want to ignore it because it makes her life easier. It's selfish. In the pregnancy chapter, she says, let's talk about morning sickness, HG, weight gain, exhaustion, and the woes of pregnancy. Can we not please, because that sounds like hell. Karissa never tells us what HG stands for or gives us a definition of it or anything, but Google tells me it means hypermesis gravidarum. Basically, it's a technical medical word for really severe vomiting and nausea during pregnancy, which again just sounds like hell to me. I could never. Karissa, it seems, struggled with this during her pregnancies and still does. And in both this book and a lot of her blog posts, she just talks about puking so much. She gives these horrifying descriptions. I do feel sorry for her. Genuinely, I do. She says that the way to deal with this was to just stop complaining. And in particular, stop complaining to her husband, because he doesn't want to hear that stuff. Apparently, a burden kept to yourself is a burden you can just pretend isn't happening, I guess. I learned to take my pain to him, meaning God, instead of my husband. All it does when taking my pain and exhaustion to my husband is exhaust, discourage, and frustrate him. And we wouldn't want to risk frustrating our partners, would we, by asking for a little physical and emotional support while we're, I don't know, carrying their baby. He caused this by impregnating you. He can help you out a little bit, okay? Think about it. When your child just comes to you whining all day about being tired, hungry, or sick, there's nothing you can do about it because you just fed them. They just woke up and they're not sick. It gets frustrating. You feel helpless. You get discouraged. You feel defeated. You start to doubt having more children. Your mental health seems unbearable. This is how our husbands feel when we come to them with problems they can't fix. I stopped going to my husband with all my complaints, and it changed so much. You're telling us a lot of concerning stuff about your relationship and life in general here, Karissa. Are you sure you're okay? Her next chapter is all about the experience of giving birth and why it should be all about the husband. Yeah. Her giving birth should be all about the husband. That's concerning. Ultimately, we want to honour our husbands as well. They are having a baby also, and while they might not be pushing that child out, this is their journey as well. Listen to their concerns and share yours. Pray together and make this decision together. She then, you should have seen the face and noise I made the first time I read this. I was like, you know that shocked cat meme from a long time ago? That was my face. She says that she likes to home birth, but warns that a midwife is simply expensive. And she then goes on to say, you have the choice of unassisted birthing, depending on where you live. You can free birth at home with no midwife and simply have your husband catching your baby. It is free. I've personally free birthed 2 times so far. My husband does not want to pay the extra. You've been told that your pregnancies might kill you, but you don't want to pay to have a medical professional there to help you. You're like, you know what? I might die, but let's save a couple of quid, yeah? It's disgraceful. What is wrong with her husband? It's like he wants her dead. And then she says she likes to save a little bit more money by not just free birthing, but by doing a free pregnancy. She says, I never saw one doctor or nurse. I did get a pregnancy centre proof of pregnancy and a gender sonogram at 20 weeks, but they would only tell me the gender. Other than that, it was a full-on faith journey with me and God. I spent the entire 10 months of pregnancy building my faith and trusting God and his plan for this baby, birth and pregnancy. And it was the most amazing birth. The thing with free birth is you don't know where in the process of birth you are at. You don't know if you're dilated. You don't know if you're close to transition or if you are even progressing. This sounds unnecessarily dangerous. This is gonna get people killed. She says, as you give birth, think about others. Think about your husband and what he is feeling. This next bit that I'm going to need your help on because I have obviously never had a kid and I'm not around that many pregnant people in my life, so I didn't have many people to ask about this. So tell me if Karissa's right here or not. She says, while every birth and pregnancy is different, your tendencies will usually stay the same. The length of labour for the most part remains the same. Your gestation will often stay the same. For example, if you go 41 weeks, you're most likely to continue to. So she's saying, like, if you have a pregnancy that's 41 weeks long, your next one is likely going to be 41 weeks long, and your next one is going to be 41 weeks long, and so on. Is this not nonsense? I thought all pregnancies were different, and I don't know. Maybe you can tell me. She then gives practical advice for what you need while you give birth at home. For example, she says, get a soft-sided tablecloth cover. This can cost $1 at the dollar store, and it's great to lay down where you labour at. It will protect your floor and make cleanup quick and easy. She then talks about supernatural birth. Did you know that you can have a supernatural pain-free birth? Some believers believe this and some don't. I personally have had one. Yes, just one. I had it with my 6th child in the hospital in front of an atheist doctor. It was the greatest experience of my life, but it took me 2 pregnancies to prepare for it. It is the exact same concept as healing. It takes faith and confidence that it is possible. You have to convince yourself through the word of God that it is not only possible but will happen and that you can receive it. I just can't deal with Karissa anymore. I absolutely can't. Her next chapter is around miscarriage, and this is one that we need to be respectful around when we are discussing it. Even with someone as generally harmful as Karissa, it's clear that going through a number of miscarriages has been hard on her, and for that she absolutely deserves our empathy and respect and support when talking about it. A lot of the problems around this, though, is that she spreads some really harmful misinformation and advice to others, which does still need discussing. So one of the things that she keeps going on about is, she says, if you find yourself in a situation where the doctor either can't find a heartbeat, can't see a baby, or thinks your baby has passed, my advice is to never get a D&C. I've heard too many stories of women that refused them and later went on to see the heartbeat and find out there was actually a baby. I've also heard from several doctors that the baby can hide within the first 7 weeks. My rule of thumb is to try to wait until the 12th week to get a sonogram. Vaginal sonograms have been linked to miscarriages. Avoid these at all costs. If you find out your baby has passed, allow your body to naturally dispose or absorb the baby. It is so much safer, and the way we were created. Our bodies do remarkable things. Now, after you have had a miscarriage, depending on how far along in the pregnancy you were, sometimes the body will either pass the pregnancy or reabsorb it, essentially like back into yourself, and that it's fine, absolutely fine. But generally, if a doctor recommends getting a D&C, there's a damn good reason for that. If the pregnancy was further along, it can be traumatic or difficult for an already grieving person to pass that pregnancy naturally, and a D&C can make it a lot easier on them. Other reasons might be because you're experiencing abnormally heavy bleeding, and that also needs to be treated at the same time as a D&C. Or sometimes if you don't have a D&C, you can be at risk of getting a really serious infection. There's also very rare cases of fetuses which are neither reabsorbed or passed, being essentially calcified by the body and just staying inside you, which ideally is something you want to avoid. Also, this idea that a baby can hide before 7 weeks is just quite funny. And that vaginal sonograms are being linked to miscarriages is just very untrue. It's misinformation. There's no increased risk with sonograms at all. And sonograms can be really, really important for checking out the health of your baby and yourself. She then goes on to have a whole chapter about why she doesn't like IVF and shames people for using IVF to get pregnant, which is just quite ignorant and disrespectful, in my opinion. So she writes, let's briefly talk about in vitro fertilization. I've shied away from this topic for years because of how sensitive it is. I cannot imagine the pain of trying to have children and not being able to, but IVF is not the answer. While many women have used it as the answer and have children from it, I believe it is not the will of God. There are many things in IVF that go against the word of God. IVF, in fact, kills significantly more babies every year than abortion. The process of excreting semen requires masturbation, which I do not believe is of God. I do find that bit quite funny. How many are we going to implant? They often implant several because not many survive implantation. So in essence, we are creating life and then it isn't surviving the process. But that's okay, isn't it? Because you created life in the first place and that's all that matters. You said so yourself, Karissa, in the last chapter when you literally said, one thing I hold on to is that no matter how long we carry a child, we gave them eternity. The baby was formed, and I hold on to the fact that they will be in eternity with me. Celebrate the fact that you offered them life, no matter how long or short it might have been. So even if they don't survive, at least you created life, and they're going to be in heaven for all eternity, right? And that's all that matters to you, isn't it? So in that case, isn't that a good thing, Karissa? Isn't abortion a good thing? Isn't IVF a good thing? The more fetuses we kill, abort, destroy, whatever word you want to use, surely that's just more little souls going straight to heaven, isn't it? Ridiculous. She doesn't think these things through at all. In her next chapter, she talks about what it's like post-pregnancy. And again, there's some bits in here that I really like and that I think are helpful to other people. For example, she says, I know the feeling of fear when your husband has to return to work right away, and it's you, yourself, and I. And I am here to say you can do it. Seriously, you are enough. Don't put too much pressure on yourself to do it all. Take it one day at a time, moment by moment. Prioritize what is important and forget what isn't. Poorly written, but I like the message there. I think that's empowering. Love it. However, she loses me when she uses all these like pregnancy issues and stuff like that as an opportunity to sell her crappy MLM products. And some great supplements help as well. I will always suggest Plexus Triplex, but as long as you're getting good nutrition to your temple, it will go a long way. If you've seen any of my older videos, you'll know that I absolutely detest the predatory nature of MLMs. That is multi-level marketing companies, and Plexus is probably one of the worst MLMs out there. Not only do they scam their sales representatives out of money, which most of them statistically will never make back, not even a little bit, but Plexus in particular has a lot of issues with the actual products they sell. They've been in trouble with the FTC for making unfounded health claims and not having any FDA approval. A lot of issues there. Karissa's next chapter is again a lot of anti-abortion, anti-choice nonsense. I've addressed a lot of this in the past, so I won't go over this again. A lot of it is just a direct copy of what Karissa has said before, but I'll just give you some of the, well, they're not even highlights because it's the low points. Can you have low lights? I'll just read out a few bits to you. Rape is a terrible thing. I don't wish it on anyone. No matter the age, no matter how they dress, and no matter where it happens. That's good. Thanks, Karissa. And abortion doesn't make rape any better, only worse. You lost me. Adding an evil to an evil doesn't make any sense. Think of it this way. If someone raped me, would I choose to kill my 1-year-old because I was raped? He isn't the product of the rape, but how is it any different than abortion? Because the pregnancy is a product of rape. That's what makes it different. He's innocent. He's just as innocent as that baby conceived in rape. If I killed my baby because I was raped, I would be in prison. Yet many women make this choice every day and are celebrated for it. Make it make sense. Well, yeah, because your baby is a conscious, sentient life form with its own independent body and ability to, look after itself. An early stage embryo is not sentient, is not conscious, and needs a host to survive. That's what makes it different. Many women go on to birth their babies from rape and turn a terrible situation into raising a huge blessing that they say saved their lives, which is great, good for them. But that's because they made the choice to do that. People shouldn't have that forced on them. They just shouldn't. Killing a baby in your womb creates a grave site with it. I'm sorry. It's not a funny topic, but that is quite a funny sentence. So, killing a baby in your womb creates a grave site within. A lifelong battle you will struggle with mentally, physically, and emotionally forever. You can't take it back. It will haunt you whether you admit it or not. I get messages constantly from women struggling with this. Yeah, that's absolutely not the case for every woman. There are some women who regret it, absolutely, but there's also a lot of women who regret going through with their pregnancies. And there's a lot of people who don't regret having an abortion at all, and to claim everyone does is just dishonest. God designed our bodies perfectly to get periods when our bodies are ready to birth. While it's not fair for a young girl to have to birth a baby, her body can do it, and an abortion will hurt her even more in more ways than a birth will. Stop it. No. There are literally children who have died because they were forced to continue with pregnancies that obviously were a result of rape, and it has destroyed their bodies and their lives and killed them. Just because a child is getting their period, that doesn't mean they are ready to be pregnant. Monster. Doctors have proven that there is almost never a time that a mother's life is at risk by keeping the baby. It is almost always better for the mum to keep the baby in the womb. Pregnancy has been proven to be healing to the mum. And again, we can trust God. Sorry, but this is factually false, and saying this is going to get people killed. Then she does her vaccine chapter. Oh God, again, I covered a lot of this stuff in the saga of Karissa Collins. She doesn't say anything new. Oh my God. It's very frustrating. She never creates new content, which means I can't create new content. It's very frustrating. Come on, Karissa. But one thing I will say is she basically just keeps sharing this one anecdote over and over, which is based on a thorough misunderstanding of the basic science around vaccines, and so doesn't actually prove anything. And I wish she would learn to use paragraphs. Look at this page. There is no way in hell I would read this out loud to you guys. It's no. She keeps sharing a mix of just pure fear-mongering and misinformation like this. There are aborted fetal cells in vaccines. Babies have died and been tortured in order to make them. There is animal DNA and human DNA. They are poisons. They are deadly. You will risk your baby's life by vaccinating. I am more afraid not to trust God than I am of these vaccines. This is just untrue. And some of the anecdotes that she tells to try and prove this point that vaccines are bad, not only do they show a misunderstanding of what vaccines are, like I said, but also they just feel really insulting to her kids. I would be so hurt if I was one of her kids and I read her saying about me, all of my unvaccinated children are in fact healthier than my others. With my vaccinated children, I've seen the side effects of them being vaccinated, from eczema to learning disabilities. They don't come without consequences. Oh, and then she likes to throw in some conspiracy theories, because why not? SIDS is real and it's not unknown. It is from these vaccines, you can look it up. The truth is hidden now. They have removed it all from the internet and banned people from discovering it, but the pamphlets are still there, and they do not lie. Stop it. Surprisingly though, her next chapter I do actually agree with. I know. She starts by talking about how at first she had all her male children circumcised because it was just automatic. It's what she felt was normal and expected of her, so she did it. But then she has a change of heart because she's worried it will endanger her kids. I am absolutely fine with this. She claims she found out via a message from God, which I won't comment on. But what I will say is that regardless of her reasons, I thoroughly agree with her conclusions. I don't like how she goes into detail describing the appearance of some of her children's genitals. That feels entirely unnecessary and I wish I'd never read it, but here we are. Personally, on the topic of circumcision, I think it is entirely inappropriate to mutilate a child's genitals without their consent for no good reason. Some kids need it for medical reasons. That's fair enough. That's okay. Do that if you have to. But just doing it to a baby because your religion says so is honestly barbaric to me. The ideas that it's cleaner or looks better or whatever, they're all myths. They're not true. And it can absolutely cause health problems. And I don't think we should be doing it to children who can't consent. If they want to grow up and have it done for religious reasons when they're adults, then absolutely let them. But let's not go around mutilating children's genitals. And of course, this goes for girls too. I've spoken out about FGM a lot in a lot of my videos. I've just done a fundraiser for the charity Forward, where I haven't actually totted up yet how much was raised, but I think it's like a good 300 odd quid. And that's a charity that helps victims and survivors of FGM and child marriage all around the world. It's a fantastic cause. And I would say that when it comes to the mutilation of, female genitals in general, there are more serious consequences and side effects. It's generally done in less sanitary conditions. It causes a lot more long-term health effects. It is more likely to kill the child than male circumcision, but I don't think it's something we should be doing to any child. That's just my belief, and I stand by that 100%. So I can't believe I find myself agreeing with Karissa Collins. Miracles do happen, apparently. And then we get to Karissa's chapter on sex, and I'd nearly forgotten how extreme her views are. This is wild. I hope you're ready. Chapter 13 is titled The Marriage Bed, and she says there's a misconception in the church today that you can't defile the marriage bed, and in return many marriages are stuck in sexual sin and lust. It's a trap. It's not freedom. And then she goes on to list things which are sexual sins, which include but are not limited to porn, other partners, toys, role-playing, anal sex, oral sex, adultery, some sexual positions, and homosexuality. God, I am really going to hell, aren't I? She says a lot of the things we entertain today we either saw for ourselves through porn, erotic books, movies, or heard others talk about. They are not natural. This new sexual revolution of erotic and immodest behaviour and vulgarity is not the purity of God, and it is not from Him. She then says nonsense like, the trap in all of these sexual desires is this. You start to incorporate outside things into your marriage bed, and then you are bored with it and need more and more. Spoken like someone who has never experienced good sex. Am I right? I don't understand this idea that if you do one thing, then you're going to need more and more and more, and you just need to keep making it more and more extreme. I don't get it. I do not get it. Even with the same person, every time is different, and it's not something you need to keep upping or increasing. You can do less than the last time, for want of a better word or phrase, and it can still be wonderful because it's not about you needing to increase something or whatever. Each time is new and different and about the experience, the connection, the feelings, the intimacy, the fun. I know it sounds horrible, but I feel like Karissa saying this is just a misunderstanding because she doesn't know what good sex feels like. And I know that sounds horrible, but you're reading this too, right? Come on. She says it's no coincidence that sex is more exciting outside of marriage, or that we find our spouses more desirable before we got married, or think about the different locations you want to be intimate. It is exciting because you can get caught. It is exciting because you shouldn't be having sex in the bathroom or in an airplane. Excitement will come from knowing you shouldn't be doing it. Sin is exciting. Sin is enticing. Sin is satisfying in the moment. Well, now I guess we know what Karissa fantasizes about, and I did not need to know that. But seriously, this again just feels like projection and insecurity on her part, because how would she know that sex is more exciting outside of marriage when she's never had sex outside of marriage? As someone who has been with people both casually and in long-term relationships, how good it is, how exciting it is, how pleasurable it is, has nothing to do with the length of the relationship and everything to do with the person you're with and how you both feel in that moment and how good it is between the two of you, you know? And her line about how we find our spouses more desirable before we get married. Right? Like, that's not good. Like, I feel so sorry for her husband if she's writing about him here, or if he said this to her, I feel so sorry for her. Either way, like, there's a lot of pity I'm feeling for them both right now. Like, I don't know about anyone else, but, like, I swear I find my partner more and more attractive and beautiful every day. It's like, every time I see him, I'm like, wow, you're stunning. And it's lovely. And I have a lot of friends who are married who say that, you know, even years into marriage, they find their partner is even more attractive now than when they met them. You know, because a lot of it is to do with that depth of connection between the two of you and how when you have the right person, they're stunning to you, they're beautiful, they're so attractive, you know? This idea that you lose attraction to someone when you're married is a really, really harmful myth, and I don't know why Karissa's spreading it, other than maybe she's trying to project her own misery onto the rest of us. I don't know. Like, speak for yourself, Karissa, with all of this, because I could not disagree more. She says, the Bible is very, very clear that same-sex relationship is not only against God, but an abomination. She says, we don't need the word homosexual. It literally describes women with women and men with men. Okay, so if the verses that say homosexual don't really say homosexual, then what do they say? It says sodomy. And what does sodomy mean? It means anal or oral sex. Who can only have sex anally or orally? Homosexuals. It's not natural. Not to mention, science itself proves God's ways. Homosexual sin causes all kinds of diseases, and so does oral sex. I can't tell you the number of infections and issues I had in the days my husband and I were doing this. This is what opened my eyes to it. Does it feel good? Of course. Is it tempting? Of course. Just like sin. Oh, Karissa. Karissa. You okay? You know, all sex can be risky if you're not practicing safe sex. But if you're in a completely monogamous relationship and you are both free of STIs and you might want to use contraception on top of that as well, then you're going to be okay. For anal sex, you do need to take a few more precautions. For example, making sure you're using enough and the right kind of lubrication, but it can be completely safe. It does come with a higher risk of STIs in general because you can get more like, you know, minor tearing and stuff like that. And it's kind of, if you want to, you know, for lack of a better term, it is a slightly dirtier area, if that makes sense. But again, if you practice safe sex, if you use the right lubrications, if you use condoms, if you take things really, really slow, if you are clean and safe and responsible, then you can reduce that risk and it doesn't have to be a big deal. And of course, oral and anal sex are not exclusive to same-sex couples, not by a long shot. And also, it's really important to say that same-sex couples are not at a higher risk of STIs than anyone else. That is a myth. Karissa says that one of her reasonings for this is that when she had oral sex with her husband, she had infections and issues. And that is kind of a concern because the only things I could think of to kind of be causing that are he was too rough with her and causing damage which led to infections. He was cheating on her and passed on STIs. One or more of them had really bad hygiene, or perhaps one or both of them had a persistent yeast infection that they should have seen a doctor about. It's not oral sex in general that is inherently dangerous, but if you're having repeated infections and issues from it, then that's something to see a doctor about. In her chapter on biblical submission, Karissa writes that the other day, I asked my husband to help me with bedtime. I was exhausted and wanted help getting everyone in bed and settled for the night, so he said he would for sure help me. He hadn't realised that I was needing and wanting help, so what happened? He began to help in ways that I didn't want him to help. He put them to bed too early. He didn't hold them the way I felt they wanted. I wanted to lay them down so I knew they were comfortable. It was a disaster. I wanted his help, and then when I got it, I didn't want it anymore. It just made me more frustrated. Be careful what you ask for. What happened in return is that I realised I didn't need or want his help. I liked my system and loved holding and rocking my babies to sleep. And he now felt the burden of not helping his wife enough and couldn't go to bed peacefully because he felt guilt that he didn't have before. If you want help from your husband, be ready for them to help in their way and not yours. This is called weaponized incompetence, and it is an entirely misogynistic consequence of the patriarchy, which just puts an extra emotional and physical burden on the women. It is where someone, often a man, pretends to be bad at something so they don't have to be asked to do it again. There is an interesting but short section on this in Darcy Lockman's book All the Rage, Mothers, Fathers and the Myth of Equal Partnership, in which Darcy has interviewed various women with stories, like this one woman who shares that her husband told her, if you feel like things need to be cleaner than they are, then you have a different threshold than I do and you have to do it yourself. This woman interviewed went on to say, so now I do almost all the cleaning and most of the cooking. Neither of us likes to cook, but I have more experience with it. He does almost all the dishes. That's how we've dealt with it. But his idea of doing the dishes and mine are different. He throws them in the dishwasher, the counters are still disgusting, and the table has food splattered all over it. I clean up after he cleans up. Darcy goes on to point out how many people, especially men, will still view this as equality because at least these men are doing something right and it's more than they used to, so it's okay. No, it's not okay. She quotes sociologist Lisa Wade, who says something I've spoken about in more general terms in a lot of my videos, which is where she says, when inequality is what we're used to, inequality looks like equality. Gemma Hartley also writes a fair bit about weaponized incompetence in her book Fed Up, Emotional Labour, Women and the Way Forward, and at one point she says the literal opposite of Karissa. She says, that means we as women need to stop tethering ourselves to the idea of our own natural superiority in emotional labour and accept that our partners may be able to acquire these skills just as well as we have, perhaps better in certain areas. We need to trust that they will succeed instead of assuming that the moment we let something go and hand it over, it will end in disaster. It probably will. It almost definitely will. But with enough time and space and perspective, it will get better. For this to happen, men need to stop feigning incompetence and learn these skills, even if it doesn't come naturally. They need to recognize the work their partners are doing and rise to the occasion. We all need to own emotional labour as our responsibility as adults, regardless of our gender. That's how we fix this imbalance. Skipping forward a little bit in Karissa's book, and there's a chapter on how she is miserable and disappointed because her and Mandry have different love languages, but as a woman, she just has to suck it up. Yeah, literally, that's the chapter. Then there's a chapter on how to name your child, and we all know how creative Karissa's names are, so interesting. I do feel sorry for her kids reading sections of this, though. Like, she says, what if you have gender disappointment as we did after having 5 girls in a row? Can you imagine being her daughters and reading this? Bless them. She then talks about money-saving methods, and I've spoken about this before, but this one in particular bothers me in terms of the cleanliness side of things. She says, other ways we save money. No PJs. They're unnecessary and create more laundry. The kids will simply put on their clothes for the next day, making it much easier to get up and start the day. So she gets her kids to sleep in their clean clothes, and then they just get up and keep wearing them. What about sweating in the night? What about if the kids have a bedwetting accident? Isn't it just all a bit gross? Her next chapter is again just a repetition of stuff she said before. One-on-one time isn't important for kids or parents. They get 1 day a year, so what more do they want? Terrible. Karissa says, we have these unrealistic expectations that we must spend every second in one-on-one time with our children, but that promotes self-indulgence, entitlement, and a small world view. While one-on-one time is great, it does not make or break our obedience to allow God to give life. We must remember that the time our children spend with each other is even more valuable than their time with us. How do we intentionally spend time with them? Every birthday child gets a one-on-one date with each parent each year. When they turn 13, they get to fly somewhere special with one of their parents. She then tries to defend homeschooling by saying that when she put her kids in kindergarten, which I think is like nursery reception age in the UK, right? They were exposed to all sorts of terrible things like secular music, playing zombies, and porn. Now, I'm sorry, but I highly doubt that. I really, really do. And if for some reason a 5-year-old did have access and was bringing it into nursery, then you need to question that kid's parents and nursery teachers, because that's not normal. 5-year-olds bringing porn into nursery is not normal. I thoroughly doubt this story. She then goes on to say that the hardest part of homeschooling is picking a curriculum, and picking the right one is trial and error. Yeah, because that's what you want when it comes to your children's education and future and development, isn't it? Trial and error. She then promotes the Gather Round Homeschool curriculum, which is the one that I've reviewed before in the saga of Karissa Collins, and for summary, it's awful. It is really not advanced enough for the older kids, and it requires teaching your kids the same topics over and over and over, with them doing basically the same activities each time, but each one just a little bit more advanced than the last. It's terrible. Her next chapter is really, really hard to read. It is about hitting your children, and this is horrible. So for some context here, in her old blogs, Karissa wrote that before she was pregnant, she always knew she wanted to spank her children. But once she had a child, she changed her mind because she doesn't always understand yet why she's in trouble. So I hate to make my baby be in pain, which is absolutely fair. If your kid isn't old enough to understand what they've done wrong, they're not old enough to understand why you're hitting them. If they are old enough to understand why you're hitting them, they're old enough to understand what they've done wrong, and you don't need to hit them. There was, in 2011, a really concerning part of a blog post where Karissa said that her and Mandre had started hitting their kids, but she said she was worried because I don't know if it's just my husband, but he seems to not know his own strength. And I feel that he sometimes spanks too hard, and I don't want to cross the line of abuse. It seems to be a thin line. And in this, she was talking about her husband hitting her 18-month-old baby, and the other one, which was barely a couple of months old. It's terrifying. It's horrifying. No. Following all this, she posted videos of Mandre telling the kids that this is the spatula you get a spanking with, and waving it in front of them saying smack, smack, smack. And then later she made a series of Instagram posts about how they don't hit their kids, and Mandre would never hit them, even though she says that he has. And now she's changing her story again to say that she does hit them and that it's a necessity. As your child, you were probably spanked. No, I wasn't. Well, not by my parents anyway. My brother's a different story, but that wasn't like a punishment. That was just him being a pig. She says many churches are preaching against spanking and leaning on gentle parenting to parent our children, which I believe is very detrimental. I was spanked as a child, and as an adult, I am forever grateful. It wasn't until I had children of my own that I began to appreciate the discipline I was shown. I was protected and kept from many things, and without my parents' discipline, I am positive my life would look much different. We can make or break our children's future and salvation with our disciplined decisions. Let's talk spanking. The Bible says the rod will not kill them, but it will save their soul. It says discipline will be painful. It says it is good for us. When I had my first child, the thought of spanking her was heart-wrenching. No one wants to see their child in pain. It is hard but necessary. It is good for you. It is good for them. It is the ultimate protection. Too many people either reject discipline or run from it because they get too angry. They wait until they aren't angry to discipline, and that is not realistic or biblical. God never waited. And it's confusing for a child to first of all be disciplined hours or days later for you to be disciplining and for you to be disciplining and not upset. They need to see our anger. This is terrifying. Absolutely horrifying. How are these people still allowed around children? Concerns me. Using physical violence against a child is bad enough, but the stats show that when spanking and physical violence is used when an adult is feeling immense anger, they are more likely to be out of control and more likely to permanently injure or kill a child. This is dangerous. She says that we spank from the time we can tell they know better and are pushing us, usually around age 2. We usually spank up to age 6 to 8, depending on the child. After that, it isn't needed much. I'm sorry, but think about how tiny a 2 to 8-year-old child can be. I can't imagine ever inflicting pain on one. It's disgusting to me. I don't know how you can see someone so much smaller and more vulnerable than yourself and think that it's okay to hurt them. And when you see the photos and videos of like how big Mandre is and how tiny his kids are, and realize that he's hitting them out of anger and he doesn't know how to stop himself going too far, and terrifying. Oh no. She says, be cautious not to overly analyze your feelings or theirs. Our feelings and hearts are deceptive. We want to stick to the truth. What is truth? Not how we feel. Our feelings can't get us out of consequences. Just because your child is sad doesn't eliminate their consequence. They can read into this quickly and use their emotions to get out of things and then expect this later in life. It'll be a huge disservice and create entitlement in them. How is this woman still allowed around children? In the next chapter, she talks about which animals it's okay to eat and which it's not. She will not eat pork or shellfish, mollusks or cephalopods, but she's totally okay with eating grasshoppers. I mean, hey, insects can be a great source of protein, no shame there, but I just can't really see Karissa eating them, can you? She says things like, unclean animals have been proven to cause disease, death, and deteriorate our bodies. They are not good for us at all. They have parasites. These animals are bottom feeders that care for the earth. They have purpose, but not the purpose to nourish our bodies. God doesn't make mistakes. I'm sorry, Karissa, but you cannot be calling an octopus, of all things, a bottom feeder. I would say 99% of octopuses are more intelligent than you. You can't go around insulting them like that. Also, this idea of all these animals being dirty and having parasites is just plain wrong. What about chickens and their eggs, which are known for having salmonella problems if not prepared properly? Where's the mention of that? All these animals can be safe to eat when prepared properly. You just have to be careful. And I say this as someone who this doesn't affect at all. I can't even eat most of the stuff on that list because of my allergies, so this doesn't affect me. I don't have a horse in this race. I just don't like seeing people spread misinformation or trying to control something as personal as the eating habits of others. Anyway, moving on, she has a chapter about how to keep a tidy home, which involves interesting advice like, we also do 2 to 4 loads of laundry a day. I wash and dry and the kids all sort and put away their clothes. We do not fold. What a waste of time, lol. The children get to decide how their closets are organised or not organised. Less is more and thrifting is their favourite way to get new wardrobes each season. We have always done seasonal big trash bag clean-outs where we throw out anything we haven't worn in a year. And I have so many questions about this. How do you stay organised with so many kids who can just decide to not organise their closets at will? Are their clothes creased all the times? Why do they not take care of their clothes? Wild. That said, I respect that they're into thrifting a lot of clothes. Love that. Same for me. I have a hell of a lot of clothes. It's kind of my thing. I love my clothes. Always have, always will. And a lot of my clothes are stuff that I've got from secondhand shops, vintage shops. I found it on apps like Vinted. Love that. I even have shirts that are handmade from recycled fabrics. I have quite a few of those. I love reusing old, unwanted clothing where possible because it's great for the environment and it's something that I feel really, really strongly about and care about. So I like seeing her promoting it here. However, it concerns me that she follows this up by saying that once a year they throw out everything they haven't worn. Why throw it out? Why not donate it, recycle it, hand it down to family and friends? Why just throw it away? It's so wasteful. Really bothers me. Helping with babies. That's a hot topic right there. There are so many assumptions that big families make their older children become the parent because you admitted that you do that. And some families do that, even small families like yours. In this family, my children beg for it. Prove it. And even then, even if they're asking to look after their siblings on a regular basis, that doesn't mean it's not harming them long term. Kids want to copy their parents. It's part of growing up and learning. That doesn't mean you should just allow them to do whatever they want when they want because it's convenient for you. As their parent, you need to put their needs first, even if that means saying no to them sometimes. All kids love playing house. So let's stop shutting down that natural desire, whilst also making sure they're not doing too much. I mean, I like that last line, but in general, I don't think this is true. I didn't. My favourite toys as a kid were like, I love stuffed animals, still do. But my other things were like, I had this toy post office where I could pretend I was running my own business. Loved that, was obsessed with it. Love my Barbie dolls, still do. I used to like finding secondhand Barbies on Barnsley Market and I would like clean them up and give them new outfits and style their hair and everything like that, and I loved that. I loved any puzzles. I never got the whole playing house thing. I didn't like playing with baby dolls, none of that. So it's just not true. Not all kids are into that. Every child is different and you've got to nurture what each one wants without taking advantage of that. In another chapter, she talks about how she won't allow things like secular music in the house, and also they are not allowed on YouTube at all. There is so much deception and hidden porn on there, I don't trust it. Which on the one hand, kind of fair. I am a little iffy about letting kids watch a lot of YouTube too, because some of the stuff that slips through is horrifying. On the other hand, I find it incredibly hypocritical that she won't let her kids watch YouTube, but she is more than happy posting them on there constantly. Can we not, please? She also says, and this is hilarious, I'm also very protective about the toys we allow in our home and the decor. No unicorns, mermaids, dragons, monsters, dream catchers, evil eyes, stones, where do stones come from? Santas, evil-looking superheroes, but I guess the kind-looking ones are fine? How do you define an evil-looking superhero anyway? And astronauts. If you will look closely at kids' clothes, you will see the deception and how they are trying to deceive our children. Everything is make-believe, from mermaids, dinosaurs, astronauts, and unicorns. They're all fairy tales. How is an astronaut or a dinosaur a fairy tale? God's sake, Karissa. Next up, we get some absolutely horrifying victim blaming. I am very uncomfortable with this. Especially in a world where children are sold into sex slavery every day, it is more important than ever to dress modestly. Yes, they take modest children as well, but we are just putting a target on our children by allowing them to dress immodest. I'm sorry, but is she actually saying that child sex slaves were asking for it because they didn't dress modestly enough? Can we not? She talks a lot about dressing her kids modestly to stop predators from being attracted to them, even the boys. She says, and boys putting shirts on and not walking around shirtless all the time can be a hindrance to girls as well. Unfortunately, there are even older women out there looking for younger men/boys, so we must be on guard against that as well. Now, we do know that Karissa and Mandre have a history of going to a church with people who have ended up convicted of sex crimes against children, and there are allegations but no proof that the Collins helped cover up some of those sex crimes by telling the couples who had admitted to abusing children to just pray about it instead of reporting it. That is just an allegation on their part, but we do know they were friends with the people who have been convicted. We do know that. I'm just still shocked that it's so common for Karissa and Mandre to be around child predators that they'd rather place the responsibility on what their children are wearing instead of calling out those predators and blaming them for it. Wild to me. She then has a chapter about how she's totally not in a cult, you guys, and another about how she heals herself. That is why I have experienced dozens of healings, from broken hands, broken legs, MS healing, supernatural pain-free births, near-death experiences, and so much more. Doubt. She then claims that she healed a miscarriage and a bunch of nonsense like that. We've sadly heard all this stuff before in her other content, so I'll skip over it in this video, but again, go check out those others if you're interested. There's a lot of stuff about her having visions and hearing voices and nearly killing her children through medical neglect, so yeah, that's fun. And there's a chapter on why she still fasts even when pregnant, which is extremely dangerous and something that I spoke about in that main video on her, because Karissa has a lot of issues around food that she also projects onto her children, which is really harmful. She finally ends with a chapter on how to make money off your children with things like some ideas to start your children thinking that way would be raising chickens and selling the eggs, making bracelets, blankets, clothing, keychains, etc. and selling them, writing books. My daughter recently started wanting to write some children's books. You can use AI these days to illustrate and then publish free on Amazon Kindle. You can help them start an Amazon store where they review products. They can start an online shop. With the internet, there are so many options these days to help our children prosper financially before they ever leave the home. You can't make this stuff up, can you? And then that's where this book just abruptly comes to an end. No outro or conclusion or anything like that. It just ends. Make money off your kids. Done. It's so bizarre. It's so bizarre. And so I guess with that, that's where we're going to end this video as well. This book was a wild ride. There wasn't too much new stuff in here, just a lot of what we've heard from her before, but, you know, I thought it was worth talking about because this might be the first time some of you have heard about Karissa, and I think combating her harmful narratives and ideologies and teachings is something we need to continue to do, and it's something I will continue to do. So, please let me know your thoughts on all of this down in the comment section. If you want to find out more about Karissa, I will link those other 2 videos I've made about her down in the video description and as a pinned comment. You can go check them out. But for now, thank you so much for watching today. Ahead of my new book hopefully coming out in a couple months' time, sometime before Christmas, it's making really good progress with it now. But ahead of that, to kind of celebrate it and get people excited about it, I'm offering these really cool, really nice big prints of one of my photos and new poems called Wings, which it's actually quite a relevant poem to this topic. It's all about the relationship between me and my mum and how a lot of her fears for herself and me, and just fears in general, kind of held me back for a really long time in my childhood, and how I would have these big dreams and goals and things I wanted to do, and she would shut them down constantly, not because she wanted to hold me back, but because she was scared. And it's a poem about overcoming that and realizing that, you know, failing is a really, really good part of life, and failing is what makes us stronger and helps us grow, and how you can still overcome all of those difficulties and setbacks and achieve something really amazing. So that is my poem Wings, and it is available as a print with this beautiful photo that I took back when I lived down in Brighton of one of the gorgeous seagulls there flying in front of the sun, and it's one of my favourite photos I've ever taken, one of my favourite poems I've ever written. I'm really, really proud of it, and if you'd like to get yourself a copy of that, it's just something really nice and special that you can get framed, put it on your wall maybe, and you know, something like that. But if you'd like to get that, then they're available from my online store now at racheloates.uk. And yeah, I think that's pretty much all the main stuff for today. That's all the self-promotion done as well. Yeah, there you go. But yeah, thank you for watching today. Thank you for listening. My Kubi-Ku is very tired and grumbly now, so I'm going to go take her on a last little walk before bed. And hopefully she forgives me for sitting and talking at a camera for so long and not playing fetch with her. I'm a terrible, terrible mother. What can I say? But yeah, thank you so much for your time, your attention, putting up with me for so long. And yeah, thank you all for your continued support and kindness. I really, really appreciate it. It does mean a lot. And I'll see you all again soon.